100,000 Russian troops. That's what satellite imagery confirmed massing along Ukraine's northern border in complete secrecy. Putin's war machine had crafted what appeared to be the perfect trap. Strike through the Chernihiv forests, carve straight to Kiev, and end this war with a single devastating blow. The Kremlin's generals moved their pieces across the strategic chessboard with absolute confidence, certain this northern assault would finally shatter Ukrainian resistance forever. But they made one fatal miscalculation. While Moscow dreamed of capturing Kiev, Ukrainian intelligence was orchestrating something far more devastating, hundreds of kilometers away. And what happened next didn't just destroy Putin's northern offensive, it rewrote the entire trajectory of this war. The key to dismantling Russia's grand strategy lay in a contested city most people had never heard of, Kupiansk. Ukrainian strategists had identified the fundamental weakness in Putin's plan. Moscow couldn't sustain two major operations simultaneously. If the Eastern Front exploded into crisis at the precise moment Russia intended to shift forces northward, the entire Chernihiv operation would collapse before it even began. So Ukraine prepared a masterstroke that would force the Kremlin into an impossible choice. The Cartier National Guard Brigade descended into the heart of Kupiansk with orders that left no room for interpretation. Eliminate every remaining Russian position inside the city. Mechanized brigades from the 10th Army Corps took up positions along the eastern bank of the Oskil River, sealing escape routes and trapping Russian forces attempting to flee. Elite FPV drone operators, particularly the legendary Achilles unit, received their mission parameters. Destroy every last Russian cell operating within Kupiansk's urban terrain. Heavy mechanized brigades waited in reserve for coordinated night operations that would exploit any weakness in Russian defenses. Everything was positioned perfectly. Ukraine simply needed to choose the perfect moment to press the button and launch the operation that would simultaneously liberate Kupiansk and destroy Putin's northern ambitions. That moment came in late May, when Ukrainian forces unleashed months of meticulous planning in a coordinated assault that struck from multiple directions simultaneously. Russian forces had transformed ordinary buildings throughout Kupiansk into fortified underground bunkers, creating a network of defensive positions they believed could withstand any Ukrainian attack. They were catastrophically wrong. Ukrainian forces surrounded these fortified positions through coordinated assaults that paralyzed Russia's ability to conduct organized maneuvers inside the city. The systematic elimination of these strongpoints methodically dismantled the Russian presence building by building, block by block. According to analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, by mid-May, the Russian army no longer controlled any consolidated positions anywhere in Kupiansk. This represented an extraordinary tactical achievement that gave Ukraine the opportunity for complete liberation of the city. The intense pressure applied by Kiev's forces completely disrupted Russian command and control throughout the region, forcing panic withdrawals as soldiers caught under surprise attacks fled Kupiansk without looking back. The most critical phase targeted the final Russian resistance point in downtown Kupiansk. Ukrainian intelligence had confirmed the location. The Kupiansk Central District Hospital building, where approximately 20 Russian soldiers had fortified themselves in basement levels after their logistics lines were severed. These troops had transformed the hospital into a miniature fortress, exploiting thick concrete walls and underground passages to create what they believed was an impenetrable defensive position. However, the Kupiansk tactical group operated under strict rules of engagement designed to minimize damage to civilian infrastructure. Reconnaissance drones conducted detailed target identification, mapping the exact positions of Russian soldiers within the hospital complex. Ukrainian forces then struck with precision-guided munitions and surgical drone strikes, calculated to destroy the Russian position while avoiding collateral damage. The pinpoint operation completely eliminated the Russian group inside the hospital building. With this final resistance point cleared, no organized Russian military structure remained capable of fighting in the heart of Kupiansk. But the Russian command refused to accept defeat. Having lost control of central Kupiansk, Moscow resorted to desperate infiltration tactics throughout the second half of May. Putin's forces abandoned large armored vehicle convoys in favor of microgroups consisting of just 1 or 2 infantrymen, attempting to slip through Ukrainian lines undetected. This desperate tactic aimed to create new chaos points inside the city without triggering Ukrainian radars and heavy weapon systems. Infiltration groups tried every conceivable method to cross Ukrainian defensive lines. They navigated mined terrain, followed dense forest paths, used small boats on the river, even crawled through old industrial pipelines. The massive pipes running beneath the Oskil River appeared to offer secret tunnels that Russian infantry could exploit to bypass Ukrainian checkpoints. However, Ukraine's hunters in the sky allowed absolutely none of these infiltration attempts to succeed. FPV drones equipped with thermal cameras instantly detected Russian soldiers hiding inside pipes or concealed in tree hollows. Even in complete darkness, Ukrainian drone operators lying in wait at pipe entrances destroyed every infiltration attempt with millimeter precision. Detected Russian soldiers were neutralized within seconds by kamikaze drone strikes that gave them no opportunity to retreat or surrender. The Russian army's entry gates into Kupiansk were slammed shut and welded closed. The Kremlin could not tolerate this humiliating defeat, leading to exaggerated and completely false claims about Kupiansk from Russian Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov. His propaganda claims were immediately debunked by FPV drone footage captured on the ground and verified by independent military analysts worldwide. The picture was crystal clear. Kiev had transformed the Russian army's Kupiansky offensive into a nightmare of catastrophic proportions, but the Ukrainian victory extended far beyond the city center itself. Cleanup operations expanded to strategic surrounding villages where remaining Russian forces were systematically cleared, allowing Kiev to begin constructing strong defensive lines throughout these newly liberated areas. This spectacular May cleanup represented the culmination of solid military foundations laid months earlier during January and February. Initial clashes that began with the freezing of the Oskil River during winter months had been shaped by Ukrainian strategic patience and careful preparation. In January, the Ukrainian army had already paralyzed Russian morale by raising the flag over the city council building in a daring operation that announced Kiev's intentions. By February, Ukrainian joint forces had established reliable control throughout significant portions of the city, laying crucial groundwork for the final May offensive. That determined stance during the brutal winter months ultimately enabled the complete liberation of Kupiansky city center when spring arrived. Now here's what makes this victory truly devastating for Putin's war machine. During the process of completely clearing the city throughout May, Russia's most elite armored and motorized units were essentially shattered beyond effective combat capability. The Kremlin had committed the 6th Combined Arms Army of the Leningrad Military District and the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Moscow Military District to this front. Two massive military formations equipped with Russia's most modern T-90M tanks and manned by supposedly well-trained contract soldiers. The 27th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, one of the Russian Defense Ministry's most trusted units, suffered its heaviest losses against Ukrainian tactical maneuvers in and around Kupiansky. The 121st and 122nd Regiments of the 68th Motorized Rifle Division, whose logistics support was systematically cut off at Oskil River bridgeheads, were completely neutralized as effective fighting formations. Coordinated Ukrainian artillery fire transformed Russian tank logistics supply routes into scrapyards filled with burning vehicles. The 153rd Tank Regiment of the 47th Tank Division, supposedly Russia's most powerful armored force, lost the overwhelming majority of its armored vehicles to relentless Ukrainian FPV drone attacks that picked them off one by one. This enormous Russian defeat delivered multiple devastating blows to the Kremlin's strategic position. Beyond the immediate loss of military prestige, Moscow had consumed the trained manpower it had carefully prepared for the northern offensive against Kiev. The Kremlin was forced to deplete its precious northern reserves to replace the qualified personnel lost in the eastern disaster, cannibalizing one operation to salvage another. The Ukrainian armed forces had not merely liberated Kupiansk, but had completely demolished the Kremlin's integrated strategy across all eastern front lines, while simultaneously crippling the planned northern offensive before it even launched. Meanwhile, as this strategic rupture unfolded in the east, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky convened a critical intelligence meeting on May 20th. Satellite imagery and intercepted communications revealed dangerous Russian military movements along the Belarusian border in comprehensive detail. Intelligence officers officially confirmed that Russia had developed 5 distinct military scenarios designed to occupy Kiev through an offensive launched via Chernihiv. The northern invasion plan mentioned at the beginning dropped like a bomb onto the agenda, casting a shadow even over Ukraine's stunning success in Kupiansk. Despite the eastern defeat, the Kremlin was still attempting to urgently and secretly mobilize that massive army of 100,000 troops to implement the Chernihiv offensive. This new invasion force aimed to place Ukraine between two fires and force Zelensky to the negotiation table under threat of encirclement. Ukrainian General Staff Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi declared publicly that the northern threat remained extremely realistic and that the front would likely expand toward Chernihiv. To increase psychological pressure, Russia began joint nuclear exercises with Belarus on May 18, attempting to draw the Minsk administration deeper into the invasion plan. However, Ukraine's response to this northern scenario became dramatically harsher and infinitely more proactive following the major cleanup victory in Kupiansky. The complete elimination of Russian threats inside and around the city gave the Ukrainian General Staff an unprecedented opportunity to execute a strategic maneuver that could alter the entire trajectory of the war. With the Russian presence in Kupiansky eliminated, thousands of battle-hardened Ukrainian soldiers who had fought through the brutal urban warfare became available for redeployment. These troops had evolved into an elite force specialized in modern combined arms urban combat and highly proficient in FPV drone coordination tactics that had proven devastatingly effective. The 13th National Guard Brigade Quartier, which served as the main striking force throughout the Kupiansky operation, could now potentially provide critical support to northern defensive sectors. Similarly, substantial elements of the mechanized brigades attached to the 10th Army Corps that had performed brilliantly along the Oskil River could be rotated northward to reinforce the Chernihiv region. With the strategic redeployment of these experienced formations, Ukrainian military strength in the Chernihiv region could be significantly reinforced, potentially reaching an estimated 50 to 55,000 troops positioned behind prepared defensive lines. Ukraine had effectively transformed the momentum of victory in Kupiansk into the foundation for an insurmountable defensive barrier protecting the approaches to Kiev from the north. The forces deployed to Chernihiv positioned themselves behind an enormous 300-kilometer fortification line stretching from the Kiev Reservoir all the way east to Sumy. This defensive barrier, constructed with hard lessons learned from the chaotic early days of the invasion in 2022, consists of more than 2,100 team-level concrete bunkers, interconnected by protective tunnels. Each bunker was reinforced with special steel structures specifically engineered to withstand prolonged artillery bombardment from Russian heavy guns. More than 3,000 kilometers of anti-tank ditches were systematically excavated along the entire border zone. Immediately behind these ditches, thousands of concrete dragon's teeth pyramids were positioned in overlapping fields designed to slow down and ultimately immobilize armored vehicles attempting to breach the defenses. Pillboxes constructed by military engineers working alongside private defense contractors were largely buried underground to provide maximum protection against Russian artillery strikes. Hidden underground ammunition depots were strategically placed between trench lines, ensuring defenders would never run short of supplies even under sustained assault. Advanced electronic warfare systems were deployed across zones extending up to 100 kilometers deep from the border itself, creating overlapping coverage that would blind Russian reconnaissance assets. Thanks to this comprehensive fortification network, the Russian army's significant advantages in air reconnaissance and drone superiority were substantially degraded right at the border area, before they could provide useful tactical intelligence. According to universal principles of military strategy, refined over centuries of warfare, successfully breaching such a layered defensive line proves extremely difficult and extraordinarily costly in both time and casualties. The military shield of concrete bunkers and integrated fortification lines positioned throughout the Chernihiv region possesses a tremendous force multiplier effect derived from both geographical advantages and robust defensive infrastructure. Military doctrine developed through analysis of countless historical battles suggests that successfully penetrating such prepared defensive positions typically requires the attacking force to possess numerical superiority of 3 to 5 times the defending force, combined with exceptionally strong logistical support capable of sustaining offensive operations through inevitable heavy casualties. This calculus strongly suggests that Russia's planned 100,000-strong invasion force may prove woefully insufficient to achieve a breakthrough. Yet Russia had already consumed its most elite brigades and expended a devastating portion of its available armored capacity during the relentless May battles in Kupiansky. The catastrophic losses suffered in the east meant that the 100,000-strong force Moscow had earmarked for the Chernihiv thrust toward Kiev now faced crippling difficulties in both qualitative fighting power and quantitative strength. This strategic reality transforms Russia's ambitious Kiev offensive plan from a calculated military risk into an extremely dangerous gamble with catastrophically high costs and minimal probability of success. The overall strategic picture that emerged after the Kupiansky victory explains virtually everything about the current state of the war. Russia's elaborate scenario of reaching Kiev via Chernihiv to force Ukraine's unconditional surrender appears to have been effectively paralyzed by that brilliant cleanup operation initiated in Kupiansk at precisely the right strategic moment. While Moscow believed it would launch a devastating surprise attack from the north that Ukraine could not counter, the Kremlin was instead blindsided by Ukraine's carefully timed May operation that struck exactly when Russian forces expected to begin their northern redeployment. The Russian units systematically destroyed throughout the city center completely locked down the Kremlin's strategic reserve pipeline that was supposed to feed the northern offensive. Today, Kupiansk stands completely cleared of Russian occupation forces, and this historic victory directly enabled the establishment of a formidable defensive barrier manned by an estimated 55,000 experienced troops positioned along the Chernihiv border. Russia's dream of capturing Kiev with its 100,000-strong army now appears functionally impossible when confronted with Ukraine's multi-layered trench systems, sophisticated drone warfare capabilities, and troops who have proven their effectiveness in sustained urban combat. The most significant question facing military analysts worldwide is no longer whether Russian generals will find the courage to launch their attack from the north, but rather when they will be crushed beneath the weight of their own strategic miscalculations and propaganda-driven planning. The Ukrainian army, through that flawless cleanup operation executed throughout Kupiansk during May, has effectively locked the northern gates to Kiev while simultaneously dispelling the threatening shadow that Eastern Front losses had cast over the capital. Putin's greatest strategic dream of capturing Kiev has been struck down by the very weapon he trusted most, the redeployment of forces from a supposedly stabilized Eastern Front. The time consumed and forces lost in Kupiansk destroyed the speed and strength he desperately needed to achieve in the north. The elaborate ambush Moscow prepared in the Chernihiv forests was comprehensively foiled by the devastating trap Ukraine methodically constructed and sprung in the east. The cleansing of a single contested city fundamentally changed the fate of an entire capital. Moscow no longer possesses sufficient fresh troops or the element of strategic surprise necessary for successful offensive operations. Ukraine, by contrast, has decisively seized the initiative across both eastern and northern theaters, systematically deepened its defensive infrastructure, and most critically has turned time itself into a strategic weapon that works in Kiev's favor with each passing day. The Kremlin's confident blitzkrieg calculations have deteriorated into a slow, grinding war of attrition that heavily favors the defending force. Does the Kremlin still genuinely believe it can achieve victory, or is Putin's regime merely choosing the manner in which it will eventually lose?